Hello, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to another of these Light and Land virtual tours. And I'd like to welcome you all back, and I'm sure many of you will join us in the next moment or two. But firstly, can I just say welcome to our guests? So, Sue, good evening.
Good evening, Sam. Lovely to see you.
It's lovely to see you too. And for anyone who doesn't know, Sue Bishop, founder member, indeed, no less, of Light and Land, and has been doing this for a number of years. I'll say quickly and move on. And we've picked some of Sue's images from a tour she runs to Wengen in Switzerland, specifically wildflowers, and we're also going to do a little bit of mountains here. But Sue is a very experienced photographer, does lots of photography as in landscape as well as obviously these flowers, which is her speciality. I think it's fair to say it's where she's happiest, perhaps. But we'll get into more of that as we go. As ever, it's really great to let us know where you are. So drop us a comment in the box, like the post and share the post is really much appreciated as well. And we will take any questions as we go. And I've also got a few polls, which if you're on desktop, you'll be able to take part in those as well. So let's get up and running. And Sue, if you can, obviously we have our first image here, but if you can just set the scene a little bit of where we are here in Wengen in Switzerland.
Okay, well, Wengen is in the Bernese Oberland, and it's a couple of hours drive from Zurich, which is the airport we fly into. And it's a traffic-free village. It's absolutely beautiful. So you can only get there by a little mountain train. So we would collect you from the airport, go by bus, and then last part of the journey on a little mountain train. And it's very unspoilt and lovely, and it's ideally positioned for exploring the mountains around. There's a network of little mountain trains and cable cars. So that's what we use to get around. And it's well known for being a botanist paradise, actually, Wengen. It's a place where all the flower hunters seem to go and stay. So,
and we're going to see that this evening. And actually, I know that summer period, obviously, if anyone saw my Dolomites one, you can get snow and you can get sunny days, and depending on the altitude. So we're going to get into that a little bit as well. And thank you to all the people who are letting us know where you are. We've got hello from a freezing Cape Town. So Andrew, Brussels, Bexhill, Scottish borders, Dorchester around the corner from me, Devon. So that's all good to know. But join us in Switzerland for the next 55 minutes or so. And let's get into this first image, because I'm really happy this one is up first, because for me it's a really great, how do I say, example of some of the beautiful things I like about your imagery, especially to do with space and to do with simplicity and cleanliness and calmness as well. And we'll get into that a little bit more, obviously, as the evening goes on. But just explain to us here, what appealed to you about, because playing with whites like this can be quite tricky, especially if the subject is white and the surrounding is white as well. But what was it that grabbed you?
Well, really, one of the words you just used, which is simplicity, which is something I really look for in a photograph. I love a simple color palette, a simple composition, and white against white is a very, very limited color palette, obviously, with just the touches of color, the yellow and the purple and the green. This was on my second visit, on my recce for the second visit. The first visit, there was very little snow. Second visit, I went up to the top of the mountain on my recce and saw snow, large patches of snow everywhere, and little crocuses growing frustratingly around the edges of them. And it took me quite a long time to find this one, which was actually coming up through the snow. So I as soon as I saw it, I thought, yes. And then it was just a question of finding the angle, finding the composition. I did lie down, which we'll be talking about later on. I usually try to get down to the flowers level. Obviously got quite wet in this case, but that's just the hazard of the job. And it's beautifully simple in terms of its colours or lack of colours. I loved the shape of that crocus, the way it curved, and the way its curve was repeated by its leaves. And then the little curve underneath it of the hollow of the snow, which it was coming up through. So because the background was so beautifully clean, I could really position the crocus anywhere in the frame that I wanted to. And so I just went for this slightly off-centre composition. But again, I didn't go in too tight. I wanted to have quite a lot of snow around it to add to that feeling of cleanness and simplicity.
Yeah, and absolutely, I love it for that reason and many reasons as well. And all those curves, like you say, they're everywhere, all very complementary, even down these sides here. I suppose what I wanted to pick up on this one was actually, it can be very difficult in bright light, can't it? Shooting subjects, especially with a bright background, just from the point of view of actually focusing. It can be very bright when there's sun and bouncing light off you. So I know, and we're going to touch on a few technical things tonight because of sort of the nature of some of these images, but you use manual focus, correct?
That's right. I do always for flower photography. My eyesight isn't that great for distant subjects, so if I'm doing mountains, I switch on to auto, but for flowers, I always do use manual focus, because even if it's not a difficult subject like this one, the autofocus doesn't know exactly where on the petal you might want to focus. And certainly with a white petal, there's very little for the autofocus to latch onto. So it will really struggle and hunt. So I do use manual focus always for that reason.
Okay, so if there are any technical questions from anyone tonight to do with using a macro, and we're going to get into that as well, and the versatility of perhaps having a macro in your bag generally. But if there are any technical questions, if you're seeing these and thinking, oh crikey, how is that done? Then do pop them in the comments, and I will try and pick those up as we go on throughout the evening. I am just going to move us to next image, Sue, though, as well. And because this is another Crocus image, he says very knowledgeably, but looking at the little header at the top, I'm going to completely admit that. But obviously we've got a different vibe here with the color, and this sort of granular texture on these petals is just, you know, you want to reach out and touch it, or I do.
The texture was amazing. It really was. And that's just as it was. There's nothing clever I've done there. This was the same day actually as the white one, and I found this purple one again with a snowy background, but behind it I think you can probably just make out there are some white crocuses behind the purple one, and I like that soft repetition of the shapes. Although they're pretty much burnt out, you can just see the petal shapes going on behind the purple one. And I just love the contrast of the rich purple and yellow against the white background. Yellow and purple incidentally are contrasting colours. They're opposite each other on the colour wheel, so that yellow really sings out against the purple. They complement each other beautifully in that way.
Yeah, and we're going to get into a bit about colour as well, because colour is a huge important factor for you, and there's some fantastic examples of that. I did want to pick up on this one though, to do with focusing, and we did talk about it a moment ago with manual focusing, and sometimes blending or stacking images is something macro photography can involve occasionally. So tell us your feelings on that, and with this image in mind as well.
Okay, well, obviously a lot of people will know about focus stacking software, and all cameras that stack internally in the camera. But they're mostly good for studio subjects. If there's any subject movement, then it's very difficult to do focus stacking as such. So what I'll often do when I'm somewhere like this is take several photographs, each focused on a slightly different part of the flower, and then manually blend them later on in Photoshop, which isn't very difficult, actually. If you know about how to use layers, it's really very simple. So here I think was just two pictures, one focused on the nearer part of the purple petals and one focused on the yellow stamens inside. I could easily have got both of those sharp by using a smaller aperture than I did, but that would have brought a lot of detail into the white crocuses behind, and I didn't really want that. So I chose to keep as a wide aperture and just blend a couple of photographs taken at that aperture so that the background stayed always soft. All those grasses and stalks behind would have looked very, very bitty if they'd come into focus, I think.
Yes, and that's a really good point, in that it's easy to get locked into thinking about the focus on that subject but forgetting your background.
Exactly. And you'll hear me going on and on about backgrounds because really they make or break the picture. It doesn't matter how lovely your subject is. If your background is messy and distracting, it probably won't work.
Yeah.
So I give at least 50% of my attention to the background, really, and 50% to the subject.
Okay, fab. Just for everyone, and there's a few more have joined us, we are in Switzerland with Sue, not technically, but we are nearly, photographically. And for those on desktop and watching live, this may not work if you're on mobile or a tablet, but we've got a couple of polls that we're going to put up through the night to do with some just engagement, shall we say. And I've just put one up there about whether you've been to Switzerland or not. So that'd be interesting to let us know if you have or haven't. And just to finish on this one, Sue, I'm really happy you mentioned about these white ones in the background, which there's just a hint of, and that's such a delicate thing to get right, but that repetition is going to come up a little bit, and similarity, I suppose, of shape throughout the frame is important to try and find, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. We'll be talking about that quite a lot in some of the photos, but just having that, it sort of echoes, really, an echo of the same shape. Sometimes it's also an echo of the same colour, but right out of focus. So it supports the subject, but it doesn't really pull the eye away from it.
Echo, excellent. I love that. I've never used that in that way. I'm going to steal that, Sue. Sorry.
Oh, you're welcome.
And actually, I won't get to it now, but we are going to talk a bit about aspect ratio and letting things live in their right place. And actually, giving space sometimes can be really useful if you're repurposing an image for a card or for a magazine cover or for a book or something like that. But we'll try and sort of get into that a bit later on. I'm just watching some of the votes coming in about whether people have been to Switzerland, and currently 72% of you have, but some of you haven't. So I'll just let that run for another moment or two, and then I will flick off that poll. But if we get into this image, so we talked about similarities just before, didn't we? And repetition or partners. But I think there's a couple of things I wanted to mention with this to do with focus being at the front of the frame, if that makes sense. Or it's a flat frame, but you know what I mean. And also how we managed to, or how you, not we, managed to have this definition still between a bright, highlight of the white here, the flower, and the background, which is also of a similar tone. So tell us a little bit more.
Well, I think the reason that was possible is that the snow behind the flower is actually a very long way away, on a sort of distant valley floor. This is at a lovely, lovely botanical garden called Plateau that we visit. And it's stunning, and the journey up there is stunning on a little cog railway. But it is, most of our days we see hardly anybody, but this one day when we go to Plateau, it's a little bit more of a tourist place. And some of my group was saying, oh, I don't know how to do this. There are people and paths, and what should we do? So I said, okay, let's go and look. And we found these flowers growing at the edge of the garden, so that behind them was the landscape. And by a bit of wiggling, you could position the flowers against the snow behind. So it was a very, very long way away. And I think that's the reason why there's definition on those nearer petals. Just because of the difference in distance between the subject and the background. Otherwise, of course, it would have been a bit disastrous and maybe just blended in. Also, a white flower is very seldom utterly, utterly white. Might partly be that as well. And there's a little bit of shadow on the petals, which helps to define them as well.
Yeah, you've got these lovely, just little shadow touches underneath. Yeah. Actually, you mentioned about the white there. So just in terms of the white balance, when you're out shooting, because color, and obviously you're a huge color fan, yes. Which is so beautiful to see on these especially, but are you just shooting also white balance all the time, or are you having to be attention depending if it's cloudy? Or
I do tend to stick it on auto daylight white balance, and because I'm taking raw files, that's not an issue. If I'm aware that it's a very cloudy day and I think about it, I will try and put it onto cloudy. But because I use film for so long, I think the white balance hasn't quite lodged itself in my mind. If you're shooting raw files, it's really not a problem. Here it was a bright day, and I don't think I had to change anything in the colour balance of the final image.
Actually, I'm glad you mentioned about the film, because you did shoot film and all manual setups. And I,
Absolutely, yes, yes, yes. I started in film days. I think actually that people that started when I did are really lucky, because with a film camera you had to learn a certain amount about how apertures and shutter speeds and so on worked. But then having learnt that, we've gone on to all the lovely convenience and easiness of digital. And I think if I started straight out on a digital camera, there's so much more to learn than there is on a film camera. It would be quite daunting, really. Film camera only had 3 buttons, or
yeah.
less, and that was it. So yeah, I did a long, long time on film before I turned to digital in about 2004, I think.
I suppose the one, yeah, I completely agree. The one benefit, I suppose, well, one of the benefits is you do get that immediate feedback. So if you're helping people with this sort of thing, there is that benefit. But I do know exactly what you mean. And
Yeah,
actually,
fabulous for being able to say, and in this instance, I sort of took the photograph and then everyone came and had a look and said, "Oh, I see what you mean." And whereas if it had just been on film, I would have had nothing to show them.
no, I'll let you know in 2 weeks' time. Yeah. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so as part of the images tonight, we're going to see, there's lots of wildflowers, obviously, but we are going to see a little bit of mountains. And actually, being in mountains generally um, tends to give a lot of different weather conditions. But in the summer, you can get big blue skies. And we've
Yeah.
talked a bit about color. And this is a really vibrant image because of the blues, because of the purples and the greens, and also some echoes of color, which I'll let you pick up on, Sue. But in those sorts of conditions, in bright blue sky days, are you still perfectly happy in terms of flower shooting? Is that still a nice condition for you to shoot in?
It's interesting. I was thinking about this after you mentioned it the other day. And I normally say that the best conditions for photographing flowers are bright overcast. So when it's not a grey duvet sky, but a thin layer of high white cloud. So you have a feeling of brightness, but there are no defined shadows anywhere. And that's really the best to stop contrast within the flowers, to stop petals being bleached out by the sunlight, to stop dark shadows. But there's something about alpine flowers that I just love having sun on them. I don't know, to me, it's just mountains, flowers, and sunshine equals paradise, I suppose. What more could you want? And it is more difficult lighting. And you can see on the lower petals of the nearest main flower here, there is a tendency for that pink color to bleach out. If I'd taken this picture, yeah, just there. If I'd taken this picture in overcast light, the pink would have been equal on all the petals. But by using a reflector, which I always recommend people to bring, you can balance out the light a lot and save the picture. And somehow having the sunlight gives that uplifting feeling. And definitely having a blue sky behind gives an uplifting feeling. So for some reason with alpine flowers, I'm happier working with sunlight than I am sometimes in an English garden.
Oh, well.
But I mentioned the reflector. I have the very smallest Laster light reflector, opens out into only about 12 or 14 inches wide, and really portable, weighs nothing, and you just balance it or hold it on the opposite side of your flower to the sunlight, so that the sun comes down and hits the reflector and that bounces it back onto the flower. So here I think I had a reflector in front of me bouncing light back up onto those pink flowers at the front there. Yeah. And you mentioned colour repetition here, and it's only faint, but I don't know if people can make out a pink sort of circular blob in the sky, yep, just there, which is another pink flower quite a long way off. And I was quite pleased to be able to get that there, just to break up the even tone of the sky and to echo the colour and shape really of the main pink head of flowers.
And again, so shooting wide, fairly wide open for shallow depths of field.
Yeah, almost always I'm on f4 or wider.
Okay.
Hardly ever more than that.
And that helps with that sort of bokeh colour diffusion, should we say?
Yes, I like it to be really, really soft behind the flower. It's actually not it's not very attractive when you see a lot of grass and leaves in sharp focus. They just look sort of bitty, very bitty. So I like them to go really soft.
Yeah.
Really, the only place I want any focus in is the flower itself, and not really its foliage and the grass around it.
So actually, we should. It's been remiss of me, other than to steal the crocus one earlier. We should have mentioned some of these flowers as well. So this is bird's eye primrose. Is that right?
Bird's eye primrose. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well done.
Well done. I can read. Yeah. And in this area, is there quite a number of different wildflowers, and are you still finding things?
Yeah. Oh, it's fabulous for that. Absolutely fabulous. It's so profuse. This is one of the ones you see more often. I always laugh actually, because there's a botanical group that is out at the same time as I am, and I've met their leader on each occasion, and we've swapped, where the flowers are. And on one occasion, I took my group to this particular, we got off at a little mountain station, and lo and behold, there was his group, and they were all clustered around something on the ground that we couldn't see. And he said to me very proudly, I don't remember the name of it, some sort of very rare orchid. So I said, okay, we'll have a look after you. So we went off and did our lovely colourful flowers like this, but quite common. And we went back and looked at the orchids afterwards, and nobody took their camera out, because they were very, very rare, but not beautiful. So I am going around photographing the not rare flowers. I'm not really interested in rarity. I'm interested in whether it looks lovely.
Yeah.
These bird's eye primroses are fairly profuse in one location that we visit, not in every location actually. It's one we do on the first day, up on a cable car from Wengen, going up to the top of Mannlichen, and they're quite profuse up there. And as you can see, this is growing on quite a slope, as you can see from the angle of the grass behind.
Yeah.
Nowhere in Switzerland is very flat, I discovered.
No, but I like the way you've played with that angle. Well, not played with it, you let it be. And that blue-green transition is really strong.
Yeah.
But it's important what you say. It's not a sort of botanical hunt per se, but it's being visually aware of the natural beauty and the natural flow of some of the different types of flowers. But we wanted to mention the mountains because obviously it's a very mountainous setting and very dramatic. And as you well know, I'm an absolute mountain nut. So I'd be happy just mainly looking at the piece, but that's all good. But when we deal with capturing things very close and very far away physically, that can be a challenge. So if you can, it's a difficult question, what's the best way to sort of go about approaching that and bringing the background in for some sort of setting?
It depends what you want to achieve. I tried various ways, and this was my favourite in the end, which was to have the flowers sharp but the mountains properly out of focus, sharp enough that you can still see that they're mountains with snow on. But I took some others where I focus stacked by taking sharp flowers and then another picture of sharp mountains with the intention of putting them together. And it didn't work for me. It was too clinical, maybe. I'm just not a person that very often has front to back sharpness in a picture. And it felt too sharp and too clinical and too postcardy almost to have everything sharp. But it can be done if that's what this is very subjective, obviously. And other people love to have everything sharp, and it can be done. And probably by using some sort of focus stacking method is the best way. Or else using, maybe with F32 you could just about do it, but then you're going to be thinking about whether the wind is blowing your flowers and whether you need to put your ISO right up high. And even then, I doubt you'd get complete sharpness in the mountain as well as the flowers.
I did want to just pick up and again, if anyone does have any particular questions, do drop them in the comments and I'll try and pick those up as we go. And we've got a couple more questions for you actually on the poll, which we're going to put out in a few moments. But tripods, you generally don't work with them?
It depends what I'm photographing. For this picture, I did use a tripod.
Okay.
When I'm doing the low-growing alpine flowers, I generally don't, because they're so close to the ground. They're very little, most alpines. And to try and get a tripod down there just ends up with frustration. So I generally lie flat, and if you lie flat and brace yourself on your elbows, you can be pretty steady actually. I find that I can hold for 20th, 15th in that sort of position. But when I'm having flowers in front of mountains and it's possible to use a tripod, then I do. I like tripods when I can, and I always use them for landscape photography, but not really with the low growing flowers.
No, it's good to get in amongst it. You got to physically feel part of the landscape, right?
Exactly. Yeah, definitely.
It's if you've not got sort of dirty trousers or stuff all over you, you've not tried hard enough.
Oh, I'm dirty head to foot.
I would say, as a sort of hay fever sufferer, the thought of having my head in some of these things is a bit of a worry. But here we've got a couple of interesting things, because we've still got that background setting that we understand to be mountainous, but you've played with an element in front here being out of focus, and we have sort of a fore, a mid, and a far, so to speak, with the mid being the sharp. And I know commonly, obviously, it depends on the setting, but it can be a preference to maybe have the first thing we're seeing as the thing in focus. But there are occasions, as like this, where if you are that close, you find it more comfortable to let that just soften out so that we can get into the image.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I usually would have the nearest part of an image to be the sharp one. But here I wanted to position myself, again, the stalks of the flowers I didn't think were particularly attractive. So I moved around so that I could have these out of focus pink and yellow flowers hiding those stalks a little bit. You have to be really close to the foreground flowers for that to work, for them to go enough out of focus. Otherwise you get blobs of colour which are neither sharp nor out. And really you want them to turn into a wash of colour almost. I love it when it works. It's more difficult to find. It's quite easy to throw the background out of focus, but it's more difficult to find the foreground that you can defocus sufficiently. But when it does work, it gives me a feeling of really being there amongst the flowers, I suppose.
Yes, absolutely. And these globe flowers, I'm intrigued. Do they have such a particular shape? Do they carry on through the season to totally open out, or do they always stay a little?
No, they always stay in that sort of globe shape. Yeah, they don't open out completely. They've got a lot of petals. They're like little cabbages almost.
Yeah, they're like Brussels sprouts, but yellow.
Yes, Brussels sprouts, yes. I can never look at them the same way again.
Sorry, I've just ruined one of Sue's favourite flowers. Don't eat the flowers, or indeed yellow Brussels sprouts, anybody. I'm just going to move us on to our next image, because maybe we could talk a little bit about positioning things in the frame here. And I know there's another point we're gonna make as we move to the next image, but you know, if we go back to our first image, we had the crocus just slightly off center, and you've sort of embraced the center here. So are there times when you know, because of maybe the shape of the rest of the flower, that feels like the best thing to do?
It depends on a couple of different things: the shape of the main flower and also what's behind it. Because it's easy enough to throw a background out of focus, but I always try to have a nice distribution of shapes and colours behind the flower as well. Here I think the best bit of background is on the left hand side of the frame, and I would consider cropping that to a square. But like you said, it's useful to have a full frame if you want to be more versatile for what you might use it for. The thing that interests me about this photograph as well, just to mention colour-wise, is that as a general rule, I would want to have my flower being a dominant colour and the background being a cool colour. So the warm dominant colours are reds, oranges and yellows, and the cool receding colours are blue, green and mauve. So I would normally want to not have a warm background behind a cool flower, because the background is pulling the eye because of its warm colour, and yet it's only a background, and the flower is not pulling the eye because of its cool colour, and yet it's the subject. And I think the only reason this sort of has been saved from not working is because the blue flowers have their own little very bright yellow centres, which pulls the eye back. And then because those yellow bits are the only sharp yellow bits. Your eye goes back onto them and isn't so distracted by the background. So it's always really important to just think about the background colours and whether they're going to detract. Imagine with one of the wildflowers, for instance, if there'd been a bit of red in the background, even however tiny and however out of focus, it would have absolutely pulled the viewer's eye away from the main subject. So colours behind are really, really important.
An excellent example of listening to someone who knows exactly what they're doing in these places. All right, that is a masterclass moment or two there. I hope everybody was paying attention. That coolness, yeah, versus the warmth. You're absolutely right. And yet, as you say here, I'm not at all pulled away, and for the reasons that you've probably explained there so articulately. And what I did want to mention, and maybe that cool versus warm we'll pick up as well on a couple of the images later on, but I did want to mention, and another question we have to put out to people, obviously a lot of these shots are being taken on a macro lens, if not all, is it fair to say?
Yes, although some of them could have been taken on a telephoto or standard. The flowers in front of the mountains didn't require a macro lens. But and macro lenses on my camera, it tends to stay there.
And do you use is it the 105? Do you have a couple, or do you just stick to?
Got a very ancient 105. I think it must be 20 years old now, alarmingly. And of all my lenses, it's my absolute favorite. And I did treat myself last year to a 200mm macro, but I haven't yet fallen in love with it in quite the same way. But 105 is a very good one to have. They tend to come in around 50mm, around 100mm, and around 200mm. So obviously the 105 or 100 is the mid one of those, and so probably the most versatile. It's also brilliant as a normal lens. It doesn't have to be used for macro, of course. You can. It's a good portrait lens, the 105, very good portrait lens. Not that I'm any good at portraits, but it's definitely a good length for that.
I think you're doing a good job with the flower portraits, don't worry. But yeah, I did want to, that was the point I kind of wanted to make in a way. And I was interested to see of the viewers. So again, if you're watching live and on a desktop, you can take part in the polls. If you're on a mobile or a tablet, you may not be seeing them. That's a Facebook thing, I'm sorry, I can't change it. But 72% so far say they have a macro lens. But I wonder whether those 72%, and I haven't got time to do another poll, use it for anything other than the more classic macro, because there are occasions where you turn round, and this is, I happen to know, because we've pre-talked about this, a sort of 180-degree swing from that previous flower image. Sue turned round and...
Yeah, pretty much. I was lying on the ground, as I usually am, and I heard a sort of rushing noise behind me. I had no idea what it was, and I looked round and this paraglider was just taking off, and there was no time to fiddle about changing lens, so I just pointed my lens upwards, switched to autofocus because my eyesight doesn't go that far for focusing, and I'd rather like the picture because I want to be doing that. Actually, I'd love to be up there above a mountain peak, and it was lovely that the cloud was framing him in that way and he was just above the point of the peak. But yes, that was my macro lens. So if anything can illustrate a macro lens can do other things, then I think it's probably this one.
Yeah, and as we always say on a lot of these, it's good to be aware of what's happening behind you. But I would imagine you can get lost in the flowers, and we're going to talk about that maybe in a moment. But being in this mountainous location, you do get a lot of different weather patterns, I would imagine. So
yes,
clouds can swirl, can't they? And it can be quite dramatic.
Very dramatic. Huge changes within minutes. It's definitely worth being aware of the forecast. I've actually been, both the trips I've led there so far, both the tours, we've had glorious weather almost the whole time, but each time I've done a recce beforehand for 3 or 4 days and had very changeable weather, so I have seen it change quite quickly. Okay. We were actually there in the middle of a heat wave last year, and it was record-breaking temperatures for Switzerland, but since we were up in the Alps, of course, it was absolutely lovely, glorious.
Oh, don't. Come on, I'm jealous. This isn't fair. I could happily live in the mountains, as you well know.
Yeah.
And actually, talking of mood, and we did want to include a few mountain images, because surrounded as you are by such beautiful places, this is a great example of how it can just change on a dime, so to speak.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so do you, I know you mentioned it a little bit there. Do you, I mean, obviously you love the flowers, but you do have a great love for landscape and very experienced doing that. So do you make time as well when the conditions are right for the mountainous stuff?
I do, definitely, because I do love mountains. I'm a bit like you in that way. And I absolutely love photographing mountains. I find them quite difficult to photograph because of the scale.
Mm.
Find this, it's often quite hard to give a sense of just the whole awe-inspiring scale of a mountain.
I think I'm probably the other way around. I'm probably struggling with things so close to me. I think you're just used to seeing that and dealing with that structure. And
It's probably, yeah, it's probably largely that. But I love it when there's a bit of atmosphere. So if this mountain was against a plain blue sky at the time, I may not have taken the picture. But I love the way that the fog and clouds were swirling around and part of it was invisible, and it's really just a sort of black and white pencil drawing almost because of the weather conditions. And I took several consecutive pictures, and each one is very, very different because the cloud was moving so fast. So yeah, great fun. And really, you can photograph in any weather. You can do the flowers in any weather and the mountains in any weather except rain.
Yeah, and so you've got all day shooting basically.
Oh, definitely, very much so. Yes, yeah.
And all in June. I mean, yeah, if you've not been up in high alpine areas, you wouldn't necessarily think there's the snow up there, but there definitely is. I'm just reading some of the comments. Sorry, because I've been a bit slack on that. I've been talking too much. But yeah, very helpful points about the relationship between subject and background, cool and warm colors. That's absolutely very sensible. And few people with macros, falling in love with them, using them at exhibitions, a few people have said. And some of it, Beata Moore, with a 150 macro, also uses it for landscapes and intimate landscapes, which is true. Great thing to use on the beach, picking out little rocks.
Yeah, excellent.
So thank you for those. Keep them coming in. If you have any tech questions again, or anything question-wise for Sue, do let us know. And I'm just trying to move that on, and it's having a minor moment, so we'll have to see how we go here. Bear with me, everybody. I will try and pick that up. Oh dear, we've had a minor freeze on the screen. So, Sue, one thing I wanted to talk about whilst I fiddle in the background is colour and black and white. And I know obviously this is a slight difference here in terms of the mountain, but colour is a huge thing for you, right?
It's really, really important to me. I absolutely love colour. And when I say that, I don't mean I need loads of very saturated colours at all. I love pastel colours. I love really softly, hardly there colours. But colour is something that really pulls my eye and attracts me to my subject. Even in some of the white flowers we've seen, the ones about third in that were against a distant snowy background had lovely blue undersides to their petals. These ones here have pink undersides. I just look at the colours, and that's what draws me very, very much. It's so important. And also the colours of the background. And I've said before how important the background is. But if you imagine that this little delicate flower had been against the dark background, some earth or some rock or something, it would have, in my view, well, it would have definitely very much changed the photograph, and I think spoiled it, because it's a delicate, ephemeral little flower, only flowers for a day or two, high up in the mountains. It seems so pure, and to have a soft pastel background, I think, is quite important rather than a dark one. Yeah. So yeah, colour is absolutely crucial to me, and it's what attracts me to things.
And tactile use of it, and we'll come into that a little bit more, and hopefully I've solved my technical issues there, so thank you for covering. It's very professional of you. Quick question, Anita, how does a macro lens differ from a quote-unquote ordinary lens?
The main difference is that it can focus more closely. So my 105 lens, if I'm looking at a distant subject, will be just exactly the same as a 105 normal lens. But if you try to focus on a little flower that's close up, a normal lens will not get you as close as a macro lens will. The technical definition of a macro lens is that your subject magnification is 1:1, which is difficult to get your head around, but it's easy to think about in film terms. So a flower that was an inch across in real life would come out on a piece of film as an inch across. That's 1:1 magnification, and that's macro. So a lot of the pictures you take with a macro lens are not truly macro photographs, they're close-up photographs. But that is just a technical definition, doesn't really matter. But basically, a macro lens will get you much closer to your subject so that you can fill the frame with it more.
Good stuff. I did want to just say, because aspect ratio, we wanted to talk about a little bit, and choosing the right aspect ratio or orientation, depending on your subject. And we have two, I believe these are the same. So
they are the same, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And you've treated them differently, and you've given them different space within the frame. Can you just elaborate on that for a moment between those two images?
Yes, and again, it completely depends on mostly the shape of the subject, but also on what's going on behind them. So the first picture, if we can just hop back, it felt very much a vertical subject. There was nothing to right or left that I wanted to include, and it just made sense to have it vertical. The second one with the similar flowers, what attracted me here were the white flowers that I could throw out of focus behind them on the left. So rather than having it vertical and only including a little bit of that white, I made it horizontal so that I could include a much bigger area with that soft white bouquet. I absolutely love bouquet. And sometimes I like it so much that I like the background better than the subject. It really, to me, that it's the bouquet, it's the out of focus areas that sort of give you the emotional in a picture rather than the sharply focused areas.
And I think if we pick up on that emotional feeling, if we can, I've got this vision, Sue, and we've never been out together. We've only met a couple of times briefly. I've got this vision of you just lying in this field of wildflowers, sound of music in the background.
That's my ideal.
And I think, we've talked about it before, and it's nothing to do with technicals anymore. It's about that feeling that you get when you're zoning in and you're totally receptive to what's happening around you. You're being visually, acute and aware. And I suppose the challenge is, how do you, do you feel that Zen sort of calm when you're there? And how do you try and then get that into the imagery? And those two things are linked, aren't they?
Absolutely. And that's the crux of everything, that question. Yes, in answer to the first part, I absolutely get into that Zen zone. And in fact, I can't take a good photograph if I'm not in that zone. I can only take an all right photograph if I'm not in that zone. But when you suddenly find a subject that you think is going to work, all your concentration is looking through that viewfinder, looking at the light, the color, the shapes. You're totally in it, and just not think about anything else. It's very mindful. It's very, very therapeutic. You lose all track of time. It's just wonderful. And so I suppose, to answer the second part of your question, out of that feeling of complete immersion and escape almost, I don't want a clinical record photograph. I want something that, when I look at it, replicates that feeling of escapism. So that's hence why probably I don't like too much to be sharp. I like a lot to be soft and dreamy. And lighting, of course, plays a big part in the emotion of a picture. The backlighting on this little flower was really what I was interested in here. Because these little pulsatilla flowers have very furry stems and furry petals. And so all those little hairs are backlit. I definitely used a reflector here to push some light back into that front petal there, and then just enjoyed all the soft colours going out of focus behind it. So yes, it's all about, I've never used the word escapism before really for it, but now that I'm talking about it, it does feel a bit like that.
Mm.
escaping the reality of daily life and getting absorbed in something else, and wanting that feeling of escapism to come back through the resulting photograph.
Oh, that's lovely. And it's, yeah, it's escaping to a different reality, I would say, Sue. I
Yes,
would say.
that's
Yeah.
a better way of putting it.
And you're creating your own, which is beautiful because it's there and it's your moment. And that's, for me, that's what photography is, absolutely a huge thing for me and for you. And I suspect anyone who's out on a tour with you, who lies down in the flowers for a few hours, will find that moment as well. And that is something
We will, yes,
you
definitely.
can't bottle. I mean, if you could, we'd both be rich. A quick question, and I love this one because of that backlight, that halo type light emotionally does something, and this image has lots of things to do with texture and flow and movement and these soft colors up here that we've talked about on the previous images as well. So I actually really love this, and this texture. Again, a quick question from Anita. How do you visualize the out of focus background?
That's a very good question, actually. It's very hard to visualize it until you look through the lens. I can get an idea of whether it's going to work or not by the blend of colors that's there. But until you actually look through the lens, it's difficult to predict exactly how the bouquet is going to go. So in the case of the photograph we've just looked at, I could see there was plenty of pink and soft greens and blues. So I knew it was a nice combination of colors. But until you look through, I mean, I couldn't have predicted exactly that there was going to be a sort of light green circular effect on the bottom right there until I looked through the camera. So it is always often something of a lovely surprise, actually.
And I think the other thing I wanted to just talk about, and I'm going to keep us just honest for time, but we're doing nicely. And thank you everyone for coming along with us. And as I look back over the weeks that we've been doing these and all the places we've been and all the different types of photography, it just shows what a kind of broad church photography, and actually I'm allowed to say it, what broad church light and land is in terms of the different photography leaders that we have, who all do totally different things. If we pick up on the background thing, and we've got one more question, which blow me, I'm going to put it out there now for those of you that can see the polls and take part. I'm putting this out about color and black and white because Sue has obviously expressed her total love for color, and I suspect a lot of us do both. But if you had to choose, come on, I'm asking you to pick that on the poll. This image, we talked about background. Some of them have had different colorations going on, and those sort of orbs of diffused color, whereas we've got this stronger sort of what I would call inky storm blue going on here. So what was the situation?
Well, this one I was really interested in after I'd taken it, if you know what I mean. I found the flower and I thought, oh yes, lovely. I love these umbrella shaped flowers. And it was growing at the edge of a meadow, and I could sort of get around several different angles on it and see it against different backgrounds. I could also lie underneath it because it's a fairly tall flower. It's a bit like Queen Anne's lace, that sort of flower. So I could get underneath it and look up at it against what was on that day a fairly white sky. I could see it against an out of focus area of grass, so that was a green background. But this was my favorite, and that lovely smoky blue color is actually the other side of the valley. So a distant mountainside, which was in cloud shadow, which has given it this lovely soft blue color. So it was miles away. So there was no problem, of course, about anything coming into sharp focus that I didn't want. But I just thought the background was completely lovely. Because it was so far away, I could have had more sharpness in the flower if I'd wanted to. But I actually didn't, again, because I feel it all starts to get a bit bitty if too much is sharp. But if you're more of a person that likes a greater depth of field, you could probably have got pretty much all this flower in focus and still not brought the background in because it was so far away.
I love it. I love it. I love the background. I love when I see that color generally anywhere in landscape, because I know it's a great thing to play with, and especially with green and highlights. But I did want to just pick up on positioning, your physical position. We've joked about you lying on the floor, etc. But it's really important, I would imagine, the angle at which you're coming at things, and this is your kind of eye level with this.
Yes, it's really crucial. That's such a good point. I've hardly ever photographed a flower looking down at it. Occasionally I will if I want to get symmetry of a flower that's facing upwards, but much more often I'm down at the flower's level. This one, because as I mentioned, it's a taller flower, I didn't have to actually lie down. I was kneeling down to take this particular one. But usually I'm on their eye level, as it were. My eyes are at the level of the flower to look across, or just a little bit above it, but very seldom directly from above, and just about never from standing height.
So yeah, you've
really
got to get active on these people.
Yes. Everyone's got good knees by the end of the week.
It's like the decorators, you've got to take the knee pads. And,
yes, actually, yeah, you might think you joke, but
no.
it's, although fortunately, because we're working on soft grass, it's not so much of an issue. But, yeah, some places I've been doing that on paths, and that's not comfortable.
No.
After a while.
No, and that's a sensible thing to take. Actually, at this point, 94% of people generally shoot for colour. Sue, so you've won. I've lost that one. I got thrashed. I want to just point out, Sue has done a number of three books in particular, to do with photography. The first two are very difficult to get, I believe, because they were released a few years ago, and there's only certain numbers, and they are now hard to find. But if you just Google Sue Bishop photography, you'll find a website, and there are the three books there. If you wanted more info from Sue about some of the topics we talked about, to do with composition, to do with balance, color, all those things, do check those books out. And I didn't tell her I was going to do that, so it's a bit naughty of me. But we've got a couple more images left, and thank you as ever, everyone, for staying with us. I really appreciate it, and it's always good fun for me to go on a sort of photographic odyssey every week to somewhere different and with someone different. This one I love. I'm going to completely just say that because of this Medusan kind of character. So I can imagine, though, choosing what to actually show, and this is a common theme of what we've talked about here, is the trick here, Sue, because this could get really busy, but we want to let those tentacles start their reach, and we want to know what they're doing, right?
Medusan is a brilliant word. I call this a bad hair day flower, but Medusan, I might have to steal back from you. There you see quite a lot of these. It's a seed head of a pasque flower, I think. One particular day we were in a place with lots of them, and one lady in the group was getting very, very obsessed, and so I spent half an hour being obsessed with her of these wonderful seed heads. And again, I've used a very, very shallow depth of field and just focused on the nearer tentacles, as you call them. Because to have the whole thing in focus is just busy and tangly. It's very tangly, it's a bit messy. Whereas when most of it goes out of focus, you get this lovely soft feeling. And also my subject one had another one just behind it, which has increased that softness, the feeling of softness going on behind. And as you can see, nothing else sharp in the frame, just paying attention to the colours behind the flower, and I was quite pleased to get some pink down below it as well, and then some of that lovely bluey green above to make a nice contrast with the pink. So yeah, again, a very, very wide aperture. I think it would have failed spectacularly if that had all been sharp.
Well, I hope, and this is a great image for a few reasons, also because of my Medusan word there, but I think it covers quite a lot of things we talked about in terms of the cooler background, point we were making earlier.
With flowers, of course, because foliage and grass is so often green, it is quite easy usually to have a cool coloured background. So it's usually a done decision. It's unusual to find one where it isn't, and that would be an occasion like the one I mentioned, where there are warm coloured flowers behind competing, but usually it will be a soft, cool coloured background which sets off the flower nicely, and it allows the flower to jump forward from the background.
Yeah, and you feel that separation. And I think, and this is another great example of putting being attentive to the natural flow of the subject and putting it in a vertical format like this, where you're allowing it to creep in there from the bottom corner, is really...
Some stalk to come in. I didn't want to only have the head. The stalk needed to be there a bit. So it didn't just sort of appear from nowhere.
I think generally, I hope a lot of people have watched tonight who may or may not have done this sort of photography, and obviously seen someone who really knows what they're doing for a start. You, not me, on this by any stretch, but realize that you don't need a huge load of technical things, both in the field and or at home afterwards, to make some really powerful imagery. And it's really interesting for me knowing that you shoot really wide open, lots of handheld, lots of manual focus, which kind of probably goes against all the things some people might have thought were going on.
Yes, that's true, actually, yes. You need very little. I would go out all day with only my macro lens and be perfectly happy with that. And then my second most crucial piece of equipment would be that little reflector, which, as I say, weighs nothing, costs about £12, and yet is really, really important to have. So, yeah, you don't need much. A macro lens is an enormous help. It gives you much more freedom. You could do quite a lot of these without a macro lens, but not all. So, and macro lens is, looking through a macro lens is just a whole new world. You see everything in a different way, completely different. So
I think if anyone out there is lost their fojo, as they say, a macro lens is a great thing to go out and pick one up secondhand, save the world a little bit in terms of production. A few £100, you can find good macro secondhand, and take it out in your garden and just play. And like Sue says, just peer down into it, and you'll feel like the whole photographic universe has been opened up to you again. That's my two penneth, if I'm allowed to throw it in. But Sue, we wanted to end as we come into our last final 4 or 5 minutes here. Again, it's great to have everybody with us. We want to end on something that kind of did a bit of everything in terms of showing the beautiful scenery. And this family of 4, as I'm now going to be calling this one, it's just so perfect how everything is sat, and everything, all these beautiful little V shapes and lines that are mirrored in the mountains, and positioning of things, especially with backgrounds, as we've talked about. But here, where you've got physical subjects in the backgrounds, just positioning and separation is so important, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely crucial. And I was so thrilled when I found these. They're not so common as the globe flowers that we saw earlier, so I was very happy to find them with a mountain backdrop. And I was pretty much lying on my back. They're about 12 inches tall, I think, these, so not very, very tall, but I really wanted them to be going upwards into the frame, upwards towards the sky, higher than me. I think when you photograph something from below and it's looking up like that, it has a very optimistic feel. I always like that viewpoint. And so then, whilst I was down there on my back, wondering how to do this, I would normally have expected to say I would like to include all the flowers within the peaks of the mountains. And I did take some like that, but I also took some with the flowers breaking the line of the mountains, and actually preferred this in the end. So there are no hard and fast rules about that kind of thing. As I say, my rule, if you'd asked me beforehand, would have said tuck it in, but I preferred it actually breaking the line. And coming from underneath, you got all the sort of texture of the petals as well. I again had a reflector just on the ground underneath them to put a little bit of light back up into them. There was one lady in my group last year who got incredibly skillful at balancing her reflector on her stomach and photographing at the same time. It was amazing. So yeah,
These are the talents you learn on a Light and Land tour, everybody.
Oh, yeah.
There's a question from Andy has come in. Were you tempted to pick out the little one and just make it a 3?
You're right, Andy. I was not because I mind the number 4 actually, but because that little one wasn't in quite such healthy condition as the other 3.
Okay.
But I don't pick alpine wildflowers.
I was going to say, is there an ethics thing we can pick up on here?
Yeah. Quite a few of the flowers are protected actually. Quite a few of the alpine flowers are protected, and even the ones that aren't, I would never pick them. So if I could bend it gently away without damaging it, then I might.
Okay, a minor bit of gardening with respectful gardening every now and then is okay.
Yes.
Do you take a puffer or anything like that to blow off any bits ever from things or anything?
No, I don't actually. I mean, I do have my little camera lens cleaner puffer in my bag, so I could always use that. But generally, if there's a fly or something, I just blow it off or
Okay.
wait to go.
Wait for it to go. That's probably what the best answer. Let it do its thing.
Yes.
And there was a question there about housekeeping of stray weeds. So we've kind of touched on that a little. I think being very respectful to the landscape, obviously, for all of us is a super important thing. But just as we get into the final minute, Sue, a huge thank you, because for me, this is not something I do, but I find it really beautiful. And I find your use of space and color and composition and simplicity very appealing, and we may do different things in different spaces, but a lot of the themes actually overlap, to do with an image that can feel calming and soothing, and it's really great for us to hear that you feel like that when you're out taking them as well.
Definitely very therapeutic.
And if anyone would like to join Sue, this particular trip goes to Switzerland at the end of June, so 26th of June to the 2nd of July 2021. But Sue does a number of different workshops for Light and Land, including I think we've got Holland coming up, the Netherlands, sorry, in autumn. So there'll be some beautiful shooting opportunities there, landscape and a bit of close-up stuff, etc. And so do check out the Light and Land website, and you'll see Sue's tutor page where all her work will be. Quick sort of minor handbrake turn here in terms of what's coming up next. And thank you, everyone. A few people saying they're off to buy a macro lens. So commission to Sue, everybody. Next week, I'm going to be in North Devon, not far from where I am right now, in fact, talking to the wonderful Adrian Beasley. And not only are we going to talk North Devon in black and white, we are going to talk a bit of colour, but we're also going to get into Lightroom and do a couple of image edits, not start to finish, but we're going to make a couple of points within Lightroom, and Adrian is going to show you a little bits and bobs. So join us back here next Tuesday night, 8 p.m, as ever, on this Light and Land live stream for myself and Adrian Beasley. But Sue, good night for now.
Good night, Sam, and good night, everyone, and thanks for being there.
And thank you from me, and we shall see you again next week.